So we are delighted today to have both with us Albert-Jan van den Berg and also Meg Kinnear, who in many senses needs no introduction as the Secretary General of ICSID since 2009, and someone near and dear to my heart because she did the remarkably courageous act of providing data about international arbitration and making sure we have transparent information related to the arbitration process. I could go on and on about Meg, but I won't because she still has to introduce Albert-Jan in many respects, and there's material about her in your packet. Suffice to say, she's had an illustrious career in the Canadian government, has law degrees from the United States and Canada, and serves us all within her capacity at ICSID. In that happy note, Meg, I will allow you to do the introductions and enjoy the interview.
Thank you very much, Susan. Well, I am going to start off with just a short introduction of Albert-Jan, and again, I think he truly doesn't need an introduction. He has been a sole, a presiding, and a party-appointed arbitrator. He has done cases under every set of institutional rules, as well as ad hoc cases. He is certainly an accomplished lawyer, author, law professor, a founding partner of Inotio and van den Berg, the immediate past president of the ITA, and the general editor of the Commercial Arbitration Yearbook, as well as currently a professor at Tsinghua University in Beijing and Georgetown University in Washington. And those are just a few of his many credentials. So I'm sure you will agree that Albert-Jan is obviously among the most eminent arbitrators of our generation and an obvious choice for this kind of an interview. As many of you know Albert-Jan, I think I can guarantee that you are going to have an enlightening, a thought-provoking, and perhaps even an entertaining interview ahead of you. So let's get started, Albert-Jan, with some of the formal questions. And what I'd like to start off with is just setting the scenario. How did you get into law? How did you get into this field?
I started to study law at the University of Amsterdam, and there I did that because originally the idea was that I would take over the company of my father. He had started with nothing, actually over a dime perhaps, and he had built up a very successful company, and he wanted me to take over, and he thought since he had not made it to university, he thought I should go to university, should do better. So, and the obvious choice then was to study, to follow the law. So I chose the law study, but then halfway I got very interested actually in the international dimension of the law. And it was basically due to a very inspiring professor I had. And I wanted that to go further. And I told them, my father says, look, I like the law actually. It's more than only for you to succeeding in your company. And actually when I talk about it, I want to be as successful as you are, but on my own terms. So he was rather disappointed, but I said, well, okay, I will support you morally and also a bit financially in the further of your career. Mm-hmm. So that is why I got into law. And after Amsterdam, I graduated there in 1973. I went to Aix-en-Provence for a postgraduate study in international, European and comparative law. Under René David, at that time a famous professor in comparative law. And through Professor René David, I actually came into contact with Peter Sanders. And the reason was that René David, by coincidence that year, was teaching international commercial arbitration as a postgraduate course. And I found it a fascinating subject matter. And I asked him, so what can I go further in this one? He says, then you go to my friend Peter Sanders, who lives in a suburb near Rotterdam, in Schiedam. So I went to him, and at that time I had already gotten a scholarship for New York. So I first went to New York, at NYU, and where I got a master's in 1975.
So you were studying at least in English, French, and perhaps other languages? Is that?
Yeah, that was one of the advice of my good father. He said, well, the first thing you should learn is your languages, and English, that will come. But French, even at that time, we're talking about 1973, is not so obvious. So you better start to learn French first. So that's also one of the reasons why I went to France.
Good. And I understand Peter Saunders ended up playing an important role in your future career. How did that happen?
Yeah, so when I was in New York and was following my law studies, Peter Saunders was at an ITA conference in New Delhi. And here's also one of the lessons of life that it is. He proposed we should have a yearbook. And the proposal was well received, but of course the one who proposes this will also have to do the work. So the poor man, he became the general editor of the yearbook Commercial Arbitration, but he, in a good tradition, he said, wait a moment, I need an assistant. And he wrote me a letter and invited me to become his assistant.
Mm-hmm. And what did that involve?
Frankly, not only writing, editing the yearbook, it also involved translating his book on Dutch company law into English. Not only that, the deal was I was engaged for half a day for this work. And the other half of the day I was set aside for writing my PhD thesis. As it turned out in practice, I had to show up at 7:30 on Monday morning and stayed the whole week at his house. I still remember the small room in the attic. And work for him the whole day, and only in the weekend I could write my PhD thesis. And what was I doing during the day? That was indeed all these wonderful publications, but in addition, I had to drive his wife to the barber, I had to mow the lawn, I had to cook. The real good old-fashioned private assistant. And the real interesting part also, although the other parts were interesting, he was he collected modern art. And I was in charge of the collection. It was great because I had my little attic and had my little office, but I had a mini museum with Henry Moore, Mondrian, Christo, all around me, but alone.
So you gave new meaning to a junior has to do anything that's required.
I have good memories about it.
What did you do next in your career?
So then I completed my thesis on the New York Convention. Maybe we come back on that later, in 1980. And then Peter Saunders says, oh, wait a moment, now you should go in private practice. I said, okay, fine, but what do you propose? Well, you go to my former firm, which is what at the time was Van Doorn Schollema, in Rotterdam. And basically that firm was specialized in commodity arbitrations. So I remember very vividly the first day, because it was the end of August, and the weather was, I still remember the sunset actually there. And so I came there in the office, and I was assigned a supervisor, as you have in a law firm. And the first thing he told me, I go tomorrow on vacation. I said, so. And the day after tomorrow, there's a hearing, and you are the secretary of the tribunal. Having written a lot of things about arbitration, but I had never practiced, I was terrified. So, and I still remember that very first hearing. It was about groundnuts in God knows where to be imported, and there was an export ban on them. And I remember during the deliberations, 3 of these heads of these groundnut traders, Mr. Lawyer, what do you think? I said, I think it is a very, very interesting question, but very complex and it needs further research. So that was one, but also the same day, a more tragic thing was, at that time, when I came, they also told me, we have here the Netherlands Arbitration Institute, and the Netherlands Arbitration Institute is actually run by us as a law firm. At that time, it's still possible that a law firm runs an arbitral institution. And there was a tragic accident because the Secretary General at that time, he had died in a traffic accident. And they said, since you have this arbitration experience, they thought so, you are now the Secretary General. Yep. So here I was. So partner gone on vacation. And that case, it had 40 going cases at that time, and I had to figure out how it worked. And they had only one secretary typist for the Friday afternoon available for these 40 cases. It's quite some work. I learned a lot to being Secretary General, incidentally, for the 8 years I did that work, especially in terms of appointing arbitrators, the problems you have in trying to rejuvenate the arbitrators, because they had the list system. And also, yeah, actually what you are already in that time, where you were with arbitrators, part of it is prima donna management.
So your theme seems to be sink or swim, and I understand the next place you had to go to sink or swim was in Saudi Arabia. How did that come about?
Yeah, life is full of surprises. So here I am, 2 years in my job as young lawyer, trying to survive with all these things, absent partners, figuring it out yourself what an NAI is. Then they come with the next thing. And here is another lesson for the younger lawyers on you is, I was too innocent to figure out how a big law firm works or functions. What happened was that firm at the time had an associated office in Riyadh because you know the Dutch were building a lot of things. It was all developing and booming in Saudi Arabia. But the resident partner had to return to the Netherlands. So they asked me, you're doing these international things. Can you go for 2 months to Riyadh to legally babysit? So I said, all my innocence, yes, of course, adventure, let's see what happens there. Not hindered by any knowledge about what's locally happening. Of course, I should have known better, because the 2 months, of course, a big law firm cannot find in 2 months a new resident partner. It took them a year. So I stayed there for a whole year, basically. But I must say, there's again, I had to figure out what all worked, because I had no idea about Saudi law or Sharia law, no idea about the local customs, no idea about the business, no idea how you have to deal with the joint ventures or to deal with these great construction projects. To figure out all on yourself. But eventually I overcame it, and I'm very, very grateful that I had that experience to find out on my own there. It was actually my best professional experience I had.
Yeah. Now I understand you then went back into a more traditional mold with larger law firms.
Yeah, so then I came back after that 1 year. Incidentally, I remember that I had still to go back for the Christmas time because the new resident partner didn't want Bill Christmas to be there anyway. Big law firms. The thing then was so that I went back, so then I picked up actually construction arbitration because there was another partner came in who was specialized in that. Then I developed my arbitration practice. What I also developed was my specialization, but I have done my whole life as practicing lawyer. That is, acting in setting aside proceedings before the Dutch courts. So setting aside, defending the good awards and attacking the bad awards. And it's a specialization. Once you know it, you can go on and on with it, which I did. And that's how actually I made my money by doing that. Apparently I was considered to be more or less successful in that area. Another law firm was interested in my specialization, and so in 1998 I moved to Amsterdam to another law firm. And then a number of years later, actually in 1999, Freshfields came along, and Freshfields wanted to open an office in Amsterdam. And that was where I thought, hey, that's interesting to set up a new office with a big law firm. I did that for 2 years, and really was well run. I must say that how the operation from London, and also how we did it on the ground. And I have very good memories about the time. I see Brian King still sitting there. He was also there, part of the gang, may call it that way. But then after 2 years, I got a little bit enough about the search hit reports. So if you wanted to have a new arbitration over a hit, then always the question was not, is there a conflict of interest? No. How many conflicts of interest are there? So, and that became, sometimes you had the telephone book of New York, like this, going on. So I said, well, look, this is a little bit too much. I'm going to set up my own boutique firm.
Okay, and that's Anotio and Vandenberg.
Yeah, it was in 2001. I moved to Brussels for private reasons, and there set it up with them. Since then, I'm that firm.
Now, I think your firm is probably one of the first so-called boutique arbitrator practices that I know of, certainly. And I wonder what you found as the challenges of leading that kind of a firm. Yeah, the challenges is lessons learned in other settings. The challenge is, of course, how do you set this up? And the challenges are not basically so much different than for big firms. Usually is what you have in big firms is
managing the lawyers, because lawyers are very difficult to manage. It's almost like, you know, these directors, economic directors of a hospital, the same problem amongst all these medical people, these doctors. So that's the same story. What I find another challenging point is how to distribute the profits, and then which type of billing practice do you adopt. And then the other thing is also what there's not much difference with big firms is the acquisition. Now, as far as the structure and the profit sharing, what we did is basically an eat what you kill system, and that worked very well. We had a basic thing. We put it for if you fell ill for 2 years, then you get a certain amount. But for the rest, if my partner goes golfing, fine. I have no hard feelings because I like to work, but I make more money then. So that's how.
In terms of leadership, other than eat what you kill.
All right. So in leadership is this. We had originally, and for a long time, we have been able to maintain that. We had a very simple business plan. Actually, it's Bernard, Hanotjo, and I. We had in 30 minutes we have all that for together. We had 2 rules. One is what the Belgians called le plateau. What is le plateau? That's the floor plan. So there was a floor of, I think, 920 square meters. And we said that is the limits of our firm. Plus that there's only 1 lawyer per office. Because I had enough that the poor lawyers, you know, in these big firms, Canada big firms, they put many lawyers in a very small room. In addition, also as partners, we want to sit in the big room. So that's what we did. But I wanted to do it in that way that you also you engage people. So what I did was management by exception, give them as much responsibility as you can. And another thing is then that I told them one test. All the people who were there said, look, if you come to the office in the morning, are you happy to go to the office? Look, are you looking forward to it? Or is it, oh gosh, another day I have to go? If you have that last feeling, don't bother to come again. So that's the way I did, and it works. There are sometimes if somebody says, "Look, I would like to go elsewhere." Fine. There are many more things I could tell about the boutique firm. Travel as much as you can because then you don't have partner meetings.
Oh, very good. Now, a lot of counsel often ask, "How do I make that transition from counsel to arbitrator?" What kind of advice would you give them?
Oh, yeah. My first advice is don't start too late. And it is difficult if you work in a big firm because the number of firms, they either formally or informally tell you don't be an arbitrator because you block other cases and you create conflicts of interest. But nonetheless, please do it because the misconception that I still see is that retiring partners of big law firms think, wait a moment, it's a great thing to phase out than to be now an arbitrator. I have bad news for you. It's too late, in most cases. And why is that so? Because the whole profession of arbitrator has really become a profession. It's a 24 hours, 7 days a week job. You have to be available all the time. It's a cutthroat business. It's very procedurally driven, and you have to be all the time on the ball on it. And if you think you can phase out and say, oh, wait a moment, I go make a wonderful trip in the Far East, and so for 3 weeks my email doesn't work, that is no longer the situation actually in practice for international arbitrators. You really have to be on the ball, and you have to, actually even sometimes more than a senior partner or a practicing partner in a litigation department.
And so what are the skill sets that you would say come with a successful arbitrator? Or is it general arbitration skills? Is it specialized knowledge of an industry? What are the key things?
Yeah. First of all, there are two levels to that. One is, I think, the basic skills, what you need, in my view, is for international arbitration I'm talking about. I think you need analytical skills, forensic skills, really on the facts, because as all of those you know, the rule is 80-20, 80% is facts and 20% is law. So go after the facts. You need, I think, these days especially, you need to be numerical literate, if I may call it that way. and of course the other organizational skills. So that are the basic skills. Then you may have, if you once you have that and you have acquired that, then you are really well ahead actually of most of them. But then the next thing is, yeah, because you will see what happens in practice. You can laugh about this, but okay, I will not talk publicly too much about this aspect. Brian knows again. The other thing is the question is whether you need specialized knowledge of a branch. It helps. But it's not, in my view, it's not necessary, because if you have enough interest in what's happening, you can ask, especially the parties with the help of the experts, to find out what is this business about, or what the technical aspects of this case is about.
Like, one of the things that you're associated with, or that I hear from counsel, is that you are extremely effective at running the process and advancing the process. Are there any tricks you have to run an effective process, or why would you think that's your reputation?
Oh no, but it's not tricky at all. And the tricks, no, it's very basic. You get organized and anticipate what's happening. So get organized, have all these checklists available, what you have to do, check out what the case is about, and then organize as quickly as you can your preparatory conference, which also needs in itself in preparation. For those, I could go on this subject, but I think is Ken Reisenfeld somewhere around? Yeah, Ken. The book about, I wrote an article about practice pointers for arbitrators. I think there's now the second edition in the book. Don't tell me that you have a third edition. That is, and there you see a number of things where I try to explain what I do as an arbitrator in order to keep a case running. One of the things I do also is actually, parties have checked me out. Actually, so they have, these days, and I have seen sometimes reports about yourself, but is that me? But anyway, they write long reports, but why you as arbitrator do not check out counsel? So I reverse also the role, because it depends what type of counsel you have in front of you, how you run the arbitration. Some counsel are very formalistic and hitting on each point. The other are flexible, the other more friendly, the other types are warrior. So it depends. So, and I check them out as well. I would think there's nothing against that one.
Interesting. Well, then, talking about counsel, what do you see as effective advocacy? What have you seen that you found especially useful? The classic distinction is between what you select as arbitrator is between a black letter lawyer and equitable lawyer for it to be your arbitrator. But I've seen more in practice that also you have to look for something else, and that are the cognitive capabilities. I think Susan knows more about that subject matter. And to give you an example about the cognitive capabilities, it is whether a person is more visually in cognitive capability or is auditory. There's there's a Chinese proverb which says, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember. Think about this, and then people, the 60% according to, I think, the research, is that people are visual and also in memory, but 40% is auditory. And really you have to check out what your arbitrator is. For example, take my own example. I'm a visual person in memory. Apparently parties know that because there's always a battle in graphs in front of me, and with demonstrative exhibit here. But others may be auditory. So you have really to make up to see what is this person, who is he and she, also in that type of mindset. Now, there's a whole discussion again in arbitration that cases are starting to take way too long, and in particular that arbitration is becoming too expensive. Can you tell me, do you think, first of all, that's a legitimate critique, and if it is, what's your prescription for the profession to manage that?
Yeah, it is a difficult issue. Let's start first with this. If you look to the percentages, the averages, is that if you look for the arbitration costs, approximately 15% go to the arbitrators and their fees and their expenses. Then there's maybe another 5 to 10% on the facilities and logistics, etc. And then you have 75 to 80% that goes to legal fees and the experts. And what I see is increasing is not only the legal fees, but particularly what you see are the expert fees. They are exploding these days, especially the financial experts. So what we can do about that as arbitrator, you would think, you have the power to police a little bit in the cost section of your awards. However, I have my colleagues, they say they are a little bit hesitant about this. They say, well, look, if we start to criticize the fees of these counsel, next time they will not select me anymore because they're yakking about my fees. So that may be a turn. But I try to convince them, no, really we try to do the right thing, and simply tell them what you think that are reasonable fees in this case. And similarly also to the damages experts, if you think that they are over the moon with their, or too high with their fees, reduce them.
Another concern we hear from counsel is the problem of the overloaded arbitrator, someone who can't fit a schedule, who can't get awards out. Is that a stereotype that's deserving, and if so, what do you do about that?
Yeah, that is an absolute issue. And from time to time I'm frustrated about it because we try to set a hearing date, only even for one day, or even a telephone conference, and an arbitrator is not available for weeks or months. And these cases that you do reschedule, and then you go for 7 months further, that you can only find a date with a person. The way I try to do it is on the basis of when I approach this arbitrator, I have to see for myself that I am available in terms of time. And the way I do it is that I have 2 basic rules. One is look to your calendar for the next 2 years and see whether it can still fit in, so that you don't have a back-to-back hearings. So you should at least have 1 week in between, which you can use then for preparing for the next case, obviously, but also for interim measures hearings or for all kind of other incidents that can happen in an arbitration, so that you always are available on reasonable notice in an arbitration. That's one thing. And the other thing is, since 50%, that's the other rule, of your cases settle, there in the schedule eventually there will become more and more air, so that you can work also on more things than you may anticipate now.
So that's how you've managed it with your career?
Yeah, I managed my career, and what I do is, and I think it's a good thing, for example, what you in the ICSID and what also the ICC these days do is, they ask you simply your calendar for the next 2 years. So, and I'm happy to provide it simply. So you have these 2 years overviews, where you have actually, in my case, you have yellow lines, that means hearing dates, and green lines means when I teach at Tsinghua of Georgetown, being the idea that the green line is flexible.
So one area you're very much associated with is the New York Convention, and I understand you studied that from your early days. What is your perspective on where the New York Convention is going? Is it still useful, or does it need a few tweaks here and there to modernize?
No, I would not say a few tweaks. I think we need a new convention. But before that, saying like that, what we did is the New York Convention, if I may, is originally the whole idea of the yearbook at the time, that part 5 in the yearbook, where we monitor the decisions on the New York Convention in the various contracting states. As of 1976, we put in the yearbook the abstracts, and became larger and larger, about court decisions interpreting and applying the New York Convention in the various contracting states. And that was the reason also why I finally decided to write my thesis about the application, the interpretation and application of the New York Convention, in order to get a more uniform interpretation of by the courts of the New York Convention. Now, it works, and I must say it's gratifying that we have, for the yearbook, we have done that we continue now. We have now 2,000 decisions from 70 different countries. And I publish them also on the website that I have launched on the New York Convention. For those who are interested, www.newyorkconvention.org. Not sponsored by anybody except myself, so if you think there's no commercial here involved. what you see is what's gratifying with all these efforts is that indeed courts these days, they start to look at each other when they have to interpret and apply the New York Convention to say, hey, how have they done it abroad? And you see English courts are looking to German courts. You see Indian courts looking to English and American courts. You see American courts looking to English courts and courts in Switzerland. So what you see here is very interesting and is unique, I think, for an international treaty, a convergence of judicial interpretation by persuasive precedent, if I may call it that way. So that works, and it works now. Until recently, it worked well. But what I see is now the convention is more than 50 years old. It's almost 60 years old now, and the wear and tear is there. And I think the time has come to have a new convention, because the convention is really, in my view, beyond its expiry date. I can give you an example. Actually, 3 examples. One is the writing requirement is too strict under the convention. But the other example is a very curious thing about the scope, the field of application of the convention. It applies only abroad, but not in the country where the award is rendered. There you have to find your own way for enforcement on the local law. For international arbitration, that is, I think, nowadays no longer a viable system, that you have 2 systems for enforcement, one under the convention abroad and one in the home country. The other thing is what I also see the courts now are really going away from the ordinary meaning, the text and structure of the convention. To give you an example, of course we should not enter too much into detail, but the annul the word issue. Now you may think about what you think, whether it falls on discretionary power of a court under May, which incidentally is not the same in the French text, let alone the Chinese text. But look to the latest type of interpretation. It is, they read Article 5.1e of the New York Convention as requiring recognition of not the award, but recognition of the judgment, setting aside the award in the country of origin. So suddenly you have a new recognition phase in your enforcement phase for the award. That's a recognition of the judgment. Now, if you read the convention, no way that is required by the courts. Fortunately enough, here in the US, they have come to sense. You see that type of court recognition thing, but they say, okay, we have to test. It should be shocking what happens in the other country for the setting aside. But other countries go much further, and they have all kind of rules, of their own for recognizing judgments. And I think that really goes too far for the New York Convention.
Let's move for a moment to investment arbitration. You've been both a party appointed and a chair in a number of investment cases. Are they different, or is your role as an arbitrator different than in a commercial case?
Basically, it should not be, but it is. Let me say, first of all, what you have investment arbitration, what always strikes me is it's almost a standard feature that you have issues about jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. It's always on who is the investor, what is the investment, and is there one? That's one thing, and there's much less in commercial cases. There are, from time to time, there's these issues about validity of the arbitration agreement, but that's it. But not as standard as you see it in investment cases. But the other thing is also what I find remarkable is the dynamics of the arbitral tribunal. Because I come from a commercial background and litigator background, I'm used to dealing with first effects. And as I mentioned, there's the 80%, 20% rule. When I sit with investment arbitrators who have not that background, they are more interested in the legal aspects, especially the public international law aspects, and not only for this case. And when I tell them, I say, look, but wait a moment, we are in a service industry. We have to deal with the dispute of these parties before us within the limits of the case they have pleaded to us and the evidence they have presented to us. That's what we have to do. That's all what we have to do. No, you have to think about there's a very important issue here about international public law. And I want to develop, and now these days they swallow it, but before that says, and I have written a great article on this. So I have different dynamics. Maybe I'm a little bit exaggerated, and I really would like to emphasize not all investment arbitrators are like this. I see the new generation coming who is really more service-oriented than the ones I described. But the dynamics in a number of cases are different.
Interesting. They often say in investment that there is a very small group, sometimes called an arbitrator elite, and that this works against diversity. I'm wondering if you think that's a problem, and do you think you maybe are part of that arbitrator elite?
I saw my name in the you know, there's this spider web with 15 names. So apparently, I saw my name also on it. And as if we are sitting together as kind of a mafia, and so today I give you the case, and tomorrow you give me your case. So like we act only together and no new entrants. It could be farther from the truth. I think what we all try to do is to get new arbitrators in, but look to the dynamics, how this goes. The method of appointing arbitrators is usually party appointment. And then you have a party that wants an arbitrator. Counsel is then recommended it to the instructing counsel, in-house counsel, and the in-house counsel has to report to management, and the ultimate management has to go to the shareholders. And if you come with an unknown name, how brilliant he or she may be, you get back says, who is she? Because I cannot sell this to my client. And even if they are brave enough to sell to the client, the general counsel says, wait a moment, but I don't know this name. How can I sell that to my management? And even if the general counsel is brave enough to say, well, look, let's go for the new name, then the management says, where's the track record? Can you tell me what is the experience of him or her? And if they say, well, look, there is not much, but it is very promising. Then you hear management saying, no experiments, because if I lose the case, I have to justify this to my constituency. This is dynamics I see over and over happening in cases, for which reason we end up with the usual names. Same, incidentally, is not only in companies that it works in this way. It's in governments I have seen the same thing. Because exactly so counsel recommends to the ministry to the minister to the government, and ultimately to the parliament. Same story. Why did you choose an unknown arbitrator if they lost the case? So you get this type of thing. This is, in my view, the reason why you end up. We tried many times to have new names included in it, but it takes guts for parties to go along. And actually, I think in a number of cases, it's in their interest to go along because you get arbitrators who are very good.
What about the famous double hat debate? Can arbitrators simultaneously act as counsel?
Difficult question, because the pool of available investment arbitrators, qualified investment arbitrators, in my view, I wrote an article on that one in the Festschrift, I think it's for Hans van Houten, is limited. And actually, if you look to them, most of them are practicing lawyers, counsel in investment arbitrations. And if you take it away, then really we have a serious problem in qualified investment arbitrators. But on the other hand, I think it is difficult to sell especially to the public interest aspect and the public eye, that today an arbitrator is sitting as arbitrator deciding on the issue, say, what is the meaning of fair and equitable treatment, the FET. Next week he's arguing that before an arbitral tribunal, again, what means what's the meaning of FET. And what the public perception is wait a moment, but if he sits as arbitrator, or she sits as arbitrator, and decides the FET should be the minimum standard, because that suits his case or her case next week, then they say, wait a moment, there's a confusion going on. And that is what you hear from now, the criticism. And I think there's a valid point in perception-wise on this. And that's the reason why I decided a number of years ago, I should not do this anymore. So, and then actually now it's a firm policy not to act as counsel in investment cases. We still act as in commercial arbitrations. Now, having said that, and being so principled, I'm not entirely principled. I tell you what happened to me is, a number of you may know that I act in the UCOS case, at least in the phase of getting the case back on track and saying, well, get in the proper proportions. And I thought I can take this case, because I took the case, let me tell you also about this, I took the case because I think the award is a scandal. But it's intimidating because it's 600 pages you have to read through, but okay. But I leave that out for the time being. I don't want to plead outside the court about this case. What happened is that the Dutch Supreme Court had said setting aside proceedings are the same for commercial awards as for investment awards. So I thought that I can take this case. Then we filed the writ. And in the writ, and this case is about the Energy Charter Treaty, the ECT. So in the writ, we explained actually what the read of the case was about, at least what I thought the case was about. This is a case between Russians. There's a Russian claimant and Russian respondent, and the Russian claimants have been round-tripping via a tax haven and a tax paradise back in Russia, the money. So the investment came from Russia, went to that island, and came back. So it's round-tripping. It's now an issue indeed, but has attracted now attention in a number of other circles. So we had an assessment. The argument we ran is, look, the ECT is not written for this. The ECT is written for foreign investments in the energy sector, not for round-tripping nationals, for your own nationals. Within a week, I got a letter in another case, in which I'm presiding. And there was the claimant says, we have read your writ, because it was published, and in the writ we see that you argue about round-tripping under the ECT. Do you know that the respondent in my case is exactly using the same argument? No, I didn't. But then I looked into it. I said, yeah, actually he's right, that party. And I resigned. Because I think I wanted to be clear and clean. So I say, so it's, even if you say, well, I don't follow the double hatting, nonetheless you can run in these type of problems.
Dangers of double hatting.
Yeah.
One of the dangers of double hatting is challenge, and I assume you've been challenged once or twice in your career.
Oh yeah, nobody if you're not challenged.
Okay. How do you react when a challenge comes to you sitting as an arbitrator?
It feels uncomfortable, you're challenged. And I see the natural reaction also by my colleagues when they are challenged. First of all, what you have to do is try to remain objective, but it's difficult because imagine that you are challenged and I see the reactions. But I'm impartial, I'm independent, how does he dare? And some are so angry that they start to write letters, and they are full of complaints then about the party, how they dare to complain. That the letter in and of itself has become a ground for challenge. So what we try to do is look, be very careful, look upon it objectively, and if there's a point, resign. Really, if you think there's a perception point or there's another point, do resign and don't stick too much with it. But on the other hand, otherwise, stay calm and only write a very short letter that says, look, we defer to the institution to decide on this.
Okay. Another issue that you've expressed a strong opinion on, believe it or not, is dissents, and you've written about dissents. Is your position that there in principle should not be dissent in arbitrations?
No, not at all. I think dissent as such an institution has its functions, has proven its functions. Think about the country here, the United States. You had the great dissenters that really contributed to the law, the development of the law in the United States as it is. So I'm not against dissenting opinions. But what happened was I had to prepare a talk for the IBA, I think it was in 2008, and it was about co-arbitrators. So I looked into what is co-arbitrators, and especially in investment cases. And then it struck to me that dissenting opinions were much more frequent in investment arbitration than in commercial arbitration. I asked actually John Beachy's ICC, and they gave me very kindly the figures. And it turned out that the ICC figures, which is pretty representative for what happens in commercial arbitration, 7-8% was dissenting opinion, even less. Whereas in investment arbitration, it's above the 20, even sometimes spiking to 30. And then so I started to look at these dissenting opinions. And then it struck me that dissenting opinions were issued by party-appointed arbitrators. I found only one dissenting opinion. By now you have two by a presiding arbitrator. All the rest were party-appointed. And if you then do the tally, you see that the dissents were all issued by the arbitrator appointed by the party that lost the case. I really have looked everywhere if I could find a dissenting opinion by an arbitrator appointed by the party who won the case. I haven't found one. There may be one in the meantime, but at that time I couldn't find any. I must admit that 100% score for dissenting opinions by party-appointed arbitrators in investment cases is shocking. It's shocking because it says something about there is something wrong with impartiality and independence or neutrality. And then if you look to the dissents themselves, because you think, as I understand dissents, you should dissent on a principled point of law or fact. But if you look to these dissents, they are about very minute, minor points. Why do you dissent about that you disagree that the cost should be 30 instead of 40% to one party? Why do you dissent about whether post-award should be granted because the relief has not been fashioned in this way? And this type of dissents have nothing to do with principled points, in my view. So I came to the conclusion that dissenting opinions actually are rendered or written by arbitrators as a mandatory dissent. That's a new development that arbitrators think I am compelled or obliged to dissent because the party that appointed me has lost the case. And what's behind it, I don't know. It may be that, look at me, I took care of you as party that appointed me, and please take care of me next time. And that is the reason why I think that, and what I advocated at that time, and it's a bit misunderstood, is that I think there should be a moratorium on dissenting opinions by party-appointed arbitrators in investment cases. For this reason, because this unhealthy development of mandatory dissents.
Have you ever dissented?
No, I've never dissented, but I must say there are, I don't say the number, but there is some cases I really have agonized. Okay. But okay, it was very difficult for me because I said this was really a case I should have dissented. Yeah. But for the principle, sometimes maybe you're too principled. I decided no, I don't do it.
Yeah. Another thing that's come up recently is the whole transparency agenda, but in particular, having arbitrations available to the public. Some of them are webcast, and I know that you've done a number of NAFTA cases that have been transparent and open. Is this a challenge for an arbitrator to manage? Does it add one more layer of difficulty or one more layer of cost?
No, but first of all, it was a challenge to ICSID, I remember. Because the first webcast we had in the commerce case, because I'm in favor of transparency in investment cases. So we had a streaming, and apparently the program was pretty so popular that the computers crashed, and there were too many viewers. But okay, that was recorded. Now it doesn't happen anymore. I'm very much in favor of these transparency in investment arbitration, because I think the criticism that we get is easily alleviated if you invite them to come over. Because what I see is when we have these transparencies, they are so bored by it what we're doing. Please. And moreover, I think more as a principled matter, they are entitled to see it, to see it, because that's public money is being spent there.
What does it do to the process, though, if anything?
You see some counsels say, well, look, they're acting as if they're on a TV show. That's true. Another counsel was also complaining recently. She says, well, look, because there was a streaming of a preparatory conference, and they were discussing the date. And suddenly, so they were discussing a date, so we have then a hearing, and then her BlackBerry rang. She looked, my mother-in-law? Says, hey, you should not be at that date. That is our wedding date. It turned out that the mother-in-law was following the promising daughter, counsel, online. So,
there's a new benefit to transparency.
Absolutely so.
Sounds good. Well, I want to close by asking for some predictions for the future, two of them. Number one is, what's your prediction for the future of investment arbitration? And secondly, what's your prediction for the future of commercial arbitration?
Investment arbitration, notwithstanding what you hear and the big discussions you see in Western Europe and now also in the United States, I think it still has a bright future. The reason is that the alternative is somewhat difficult to set up. Think about the investment court. I'm not against it. I think it's some worthwhile exploring. But you will run in the same problems as, for example, the WTO has. Who do you nominate? And if there is a candidate which one state believes no good, and the objection, that you get all kinds of debates. Furthermore, I think it has a real good future, because the discussion is only in Western Europe and now in the United States. If you go to the other parts of the world, they're surprised about discussion. This is what you're talking about, because we love this. We like this arbitration. That's our only means to have a security for our investment in terms of procedure. So I'm not so worried about. I'm more concerned about investment arbitration, is that we should really train the new generation of investment arbitrators. But I think there are a lot of good initiatives are now underway, so I'm confident in that respect. So that's about investment arbitration. About commercial arbitration, I think the future is bright, because it has really come to maturity. Far more sophisticated. Also, both in arbitrators were sophisticated, but also the methods and the infrastructure they use for it. It's really something that has a really promising future, actually continuing promising future. If I may, for the younger lawyers amongst you, if I may give an advice, I know, and it's also my own experience, is my own associates, investment arbitration looks very attractive, but please do the math. If you know how many cases you have per year percentage-wise in investment arbitration, and how many cases you have percentage-wise in commercial arbitration, it is 95% is commercial arbitration, international commercial arbitration, and 5% is investment arbitration. So my advice is, if you really want to have a future, for the time being, really at least more secure, go for commercial arbitration. Okay. I know I'm not speaking in favor of your institution, but I try to give you some reality of what's going on. And I must say, this is completely opposite what you read in the literature. You see 95% of the publications concern investment arbitration and 5% commercial arbitration. Interesting.
Is that maybe a bit about the transparency issues as well, though?
May well be.
Good. Well, I'd like to thank you so much. You've gone through a lot of subjects and you've been very candid with us. Do you have any final closing words?
No, I thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the interview. And I hope I was not too blunt in my Dutch way.
Thank you.